Since the dawn of time, societies have been starting essays in pretty silly ways, and today we're going to do something about that. First impressions matter, and that's why the first line of a paper can be so important. That's also why the first line can be so tricky to write. So much depends on the way that the first line introduces the reader to your project. If the first line flops, your reader isn't going to have much of a reason to keep going. With so much at stake then, I think we approach first lines with an understandable amount of anxiety. We want to put our best foot forward and we want to impress our readers, but we're not going to write our best stuff if we're writing from anxiety. And as a result, we end up starting our papers in pretty silly ways. Now, if I had a dime for every time I read a paper that started in a silly way, I could probably set myself up with a pretty nice dinner. And of course, when I say silly, what I really mean is ineffective. So today, I want to spend some time talking about these ineffective first lines of essays to explain first why they're ineffective, and then more importantly, to help you to write more effective first lines moving forward. So let's get on with it. In the years that I've been teaching, I've seen papers on every topic that have all started with lines like, "Since the beginning of time, as long as humans have walked the earth, in today's society." Everyone knows that. But these first lines create the wrong kind of first impression. The fact that I've seen them so often is a hint to their first big weakness. They're cliché. And when I say cliché, I don't just mean common. Clichés are common, but the bigger problem is that a cliché is neither the only nor the best solution for a job. Take clichés in comedy, for example. So listen, folks, I mean, what is up with airline food? Seriously, have any of you had it? Like, somebody tell me, what is up with it? What is the deal with airline food? Somebody. Anybody. No, seriously, anyone. Like, anybody? Someone? Anyone? Is this thing even on? The problem with that joke is not just that it's common. If it was consistently hilarious every time you heard it, nobody would be complaining about it. The joke is a cliché because it's not the best joke. There are better jokes you could be telling, and every time you tell the suboptimal, more common joke, you've given up the opportunity to say something truly funny. And the same issue is at work with a bad first line. By resorting to first lines about the dawn of time and today's society, not only do you say something that countless other people have already said, but you're giving up the chance to say something truly meaningful. The real downfall of these cliché first lines is that they don't actually say anything, or more truthfully, they try to say way too much, and as a result, end up saying nothing at all. For example, there's no way that a 4-page paper is actually going to cover a topic from the dawn of time until today, and I'm really skeptical that anyone, no matter how talented, is going to be able to address the whole of today's society using only 5 sources from the library. I mean, imagine if someone tried to make that kind of impression during a job interview. That is a great question. And, I just want to start out by saying thank you for giving me this interview, taking time out of your busy schedules. I know you're busy people, and I really appreciate that. But to respond more directly to the question that you asked, I think I'm a great fit for Kaput Co. International because I really think I have all of the skills that a person would need to be able to fix all of the problems that business as a whole has faced since really, the dawn of the modern industrial age. It just wouldn't work. The claims are too big and the interviewer would have no reason to believe what you're saying. And the same thing is true when a reader runs into a paper that starts with a broad, sweeping declaration like that. There's simply no way that a paper can actually have the sources to talk about a topic from the dawn of time until today. It's not very realistic, so the first line ends up falling really flat. And if that's not convincing enough, these silly first lines also do the harm of causing you to write about something other than your actual topic. When these first lines show up in a paper, it's because the writer is trying so hard to be impressive that they end up putting on some kind of flashy show that doesn't really have a lot to do with the actual topic of the paper. And that's too bad, because you can write a pretty good first line by just giving your paper a little more credit. Now, I'm on record already as being against the idea of hooks when it comes to writing. You hear a lot about hooks in writing classes, but then people always get the idea that that means you have to do something cheap and flashy if you're going to grab your reader's attention from the very beginning. And that's why you get silly first lines like "since the dawn of time." It's like slapping a big neon sign at the top of your paper that says, "Look, this is really important. This topic has mattered since the dawn of time. Isn't it huge and exciting and worth your time?" I bet you're hooked now, aren't you? But an experienced reader will not be hooked. An experienced reader will see that kind of opener for the cheap ploy that it is, and they may just skip it altogether so that they can get into what your paper is actually about. So I believe that a writer's real job is to get their readers to care about the topic at hand, not to dazzle them into submission. Just think of our job interview buddy. If you're the interviewer, you're probably not going to take the job candidate very seriously if they show up and say that they can solve all of the world's problems. It's not very realistic, and it doesn't actually help you get to know the candidate at all. You're probably going to be much more interested in hearing them give an honest assessment of their strengths and abilities. You want to know what they're about and who they are, not how flashy of a pitch they can put together. And again, the same thing is happening in the first line of a paper. Forget the razzle-dazzle. Give your reader a reason to care about your topic right away. And I mean your actual project, not the whole history of civilization. And you can do that best by being specific, realistic, and grounded in the particulars of your project. A good first impression is a true impression, and readers will be able to tell pretty quickly if your first sentence is just for show, or if it's actually a fair representation of your project. So start with something that gets your readers into the action right away. Don't make them sit through a song and dance because you want to impress them first. Instead, impress them with how insightful your project is, not with some kind of empty brag about how much of society cares about your topic. To give you a sense of what less silly first lines look like, I've gone through some of the papers that I've written during my time in PhD school so that I could show you what I'm thinking about when I'm writing a first line. Of course, these aren't perfect. I did write them on pretty crunch deadlines, but they're better than talking in the abstract. So here we go. Here's one from a paper about grammar textbooks in the 19th century. Please, hold your snoring until the end. It seems that paying deliberate attention to language per se was a common practice for American readers of the 19th century. Dialect literature rose to prominence. Poetry permeated public life from soap ads to newspaper columns, and textbooks dealing with grammar, orthography, and elocution abounded. This sentence sets the stage without going back to the primordial earth to do it. It tells the reader that this paper is interested in the way direct attention to language permeated the culture of 19th century America, something that paves the way for a paper about the role that grammar instruction would have played in such a context. And yes, this sentence does start out broad, but it has the sources to back up that breadth. It's not just talking about society as a whole, it's talking about poetry, soap ads, and textbooks in 19th century America. In other words, it's not making any promises that the rest of the paper can't keep. And it's also clear that I just wanted to get away with using per se in a sentence and that I couldn't resist a little bit of alliteration. Now here's another that takes a different approach. This paper is about the possibility of using scientific research methods in the fields of rhetoric and composition. In 2012, a special issue of Perspectives on Psychological Science addressed a then recent spate of faulty studies involving questionable practices, unreplicable methods, and even outright fraud. Where the last example was broad and informative, this one is much more specific, zeroing in on a single issue of a particular journal. This paper starts with a clear sense of crisis. It's not creating drama to attract a reader, it's citing an actual event that has implications for the rest of the paper. It's a crisis that serves as the starting point for the rest of the argument. Because of its natural drama, this sentence might grab a reader's attention, but it does so without resorting to a cheap, flashy hook, and it does a good job of bringing readers into the main focus of the paper itself. This sentence comes from a philosophy of teaching statement. Every semester, there are a couple students who introduce themselves to me and to the class as bad writers, or at least not very good writers. The effectiveness of this first sentence comes from the way that it says what the reader isn't expecting. It might seem kind of strange for a "look how good of a teacher I am" paper to start with bad writers. Wouldn't you expect a paper like this to start with the greatest hits, not the humble beginnings? The parenthetical aside also sets the tone for the paper. It undercuts the drama of the unexpected beginning and tells the reader that the author of this paper is going to be self-aware, something that is especially appropriate for a document that is rooted in self-reflection. And finally, here's the first sentence of a paper about how big universities could license their writing curricula to smaller institutions. First-year composition appears to be on the move. Short and to the point, this sentence steers clear of the sweeping, impressive generalities of silly first lines. But it isn't just a dry statement of fact either. It generates interest by starting the reader with a sense of motion. Things are on the move. They aren't what they used to be, so hop on board and let's see where things go. It also sets up the fundamental problem that the paper aims to solve. So rather than talking about some unrelated thing like the prevailing trends of human society, it just starts with the topic at hand. A topic and problem that is interesting enough by itself to be worth talking about. So hopefully you can see what sets a reasonable first line apart from a silly one. Good openers stick to the topic at hand, and they don't exaggerate the importance of a paper just to impress a reader. They only make promises that the paper can keep, and they let the importance of the actual paper speak for itself. They make a good first impression, and they make a realistic first impression. And that is going to give readers a reason to keep reading. It's understandable that you might want to make your first line sound as big and important as possible. You want readers to see the importance of your topic, and you want them to keep reading. But inflating the importance of your paper at the start isn't the way to do that. As soon as you get into the actual paper, that overinflated, cosmically important first line is only going to set your readers up for a letdown. So as you write your first line, give yourself and your topic some credit. If your topic was interesting enough to write about, it's going to be interesting enough to read about. There's no need to wheel in the showboat just to make a good first impression. Besides, especially if you're writing an academic paper, it's not like cosmic importance is really the goal. Academic readers aren't looking for sweeping solutions to problems that have plagued civilization since time immemorial. Really, they're looking for information about how a specific subspecies of fish that only lives in a single mountain lake is being affected by a 2% drop in the pH of the local rainfall. That kind of unflashy specificity is exactly what academic writing is all about. So don't feel bad if your topic seems small. If anything, that probably just means you're on the right track, and being upfront about the specific value of your work will win your readers over more than any kind of linguistic jazz hands ever will. But anyway, that's where we'll stop off for now. I really do appreciate your time and attention. If this video left a good impression, give it a like. And if you want to leave a good impression, share your thoughts and questions in the comments. And of course, if you'd like to continue learning about writing with us, I invite you to become a subscriber so that you'll always be up to date on what the show has to offer. Now go out there and write some great first lines, and we'll meet back here at the same time next week.